Welcome everyone. It's nice to see you all here on a nice cold Sunday afternoon, but it's nice and warm in here. And it's warmer because of your company. My name's Andrew Malcolm, and I'm speaking into this microphone because we are recording today. I've had a number of people from out of town who've asked for a recording. So is it on that camera? Sorry, just talking to my son. Yep. So hello to anyone who's watching on the recording, and maybe you could turn around and just look at the camera at back and give them a wave to acknowledge who they are. Thank you. Lovely. Great. It's got my clickety-click. So today's seminar is on what to prepare and DIY, particularly do it yourself or doing parts of it yourself. And so what I'm going to do is step through some of the main things that we do in a funeral. And for some people, they want to know a little bit about DIY. Some people want to know a whole lot. So I just want to acknowledge the fact that there's always a range of people. So if somebody keeps asking me all the questions, I might try and get someone else to ask questions as well, because I want to make sure everybody's got the knowledge they want from today when they leave. I have got some handout brochures, but I'm not giving you them now, because if I do, you won't listen and watch, you'll look at the brochure. I know how people function. When I was doing my funeral directing training, part of it was Psych 101, and I had a 99% average. So I know what you're thinking. No, I loved my funeral directing training. It was I was never an A grade student. I had a father who was a doctor, and I didn't get those brains, but somehow when it came to, he was funnily enough a doctor of psychology, funnily enough for me, just being in the realm of something that had a passion for me meant I learnt in a totally different way. So I love teaching, not only a funeral director of 42 years, but also the owner of Kapiti Coast Funeral Home. And in my career, I'm a trained and qualified embalmer, as well as a trained and qualified funeral director. I've done part of a degree in business studies at Massey, and also I ended up being national tutor for both for the funeral directing program in New Zealand for 2 years. So I've been there, done that, basically. I was the national president of the association until October last year, and I'm still on the board, but stepping down in October from that. And I was also on the industry training board when that was in play, which the governments have since changed all that now. So that's a little bit about me. I do have 5 children and 5 grandchildren. I know that's hard when you look at me and think he's only 30, but I'm 61 next week. So, and this is one of my sons just at the back doing the sound and the recording for me today. So welcome. So this is, I wrote some stuff for today. We've done a number of video blogs. I don't know if anyone's ever seen any of my blogs, but I've got probably about 50 or 60 blogs on their website. Every week I do something new and talk about something new. Funnily enough, some of them have tens of thousands of hits, but 90% of that is from overseas. It's interesting how particularly America wants to know a little bit about how we do things in this end of the world. So I did one of my blogs on DIY funerals. I've done quite a few over the years, but the latest one I just threw into AI and said, can you make a picture graph of what I said? And that's what it came up with. So this is not my clever artistry, it's what AI came up with from my confused brain. And again, I'll just talk very briefly about this and then go into some of the practicalities. But what I was really trying to talk about with DIY was meaningful empowerment for people so they could do something or some things themselves, but balancing that with practicality and cost, that sometimes it's not cheaper to do it yourself. Sometimes it is. Depends on you, and it depends on your circumstance and the people who are supporting you. So yeah, we will get started. That's me. I have a little brochure I'm going to give you in a minute, which is on DIY funerals, and that's what it looks like there. I've explained who I am, so I'm going to get straight into it. The first one that most people think about with DIY funerals is a casket. Doing it themselves, building it themselves. I've had some really interesting home-built caskets over the years. If they are a joiner, or the son or whoever's building it is a joiner, they usually do an amazing job. Or if they're pretty much a home handyman person with wood, they can do a really good job. I've had some builders as opposed to joiners build caskets, and you can tell the difference if anyone knows the difference between a builder and a joiner. Some of those we've had to literally, when a spouse has said, this is what we want to use, we go, well, I'm sorry, but we're not going to take responsibility for that if something goes wrong. And then we've had to get someone in to rebuild them. So sometimes it's not as cheap to build your own if you don't follow the pattern. The people have done the best with following patterns, and I know part of this is, someone said to me on the way in, you're doing yourself out of a job. But the people who've done best with building a casket from scratch are the ones who've come and seen us, and then we've spent time with them, letting them see some of the professional caskets, measure them, look at the jointers, look at how the base is put in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Doesn't cost you anything to come and talk to us and for us to show you something like that. So if you are thinking of doing something yourself, come and have a look at a really, really good one that passes the regulation. There's a funny thing in New Zealand, and I should explain that from scratch. If you want to do something yourself, you can. If we have to do something, we have to meet all the regulations. So if you want to have a casket and build it yourself, we're talking about caskets at the moment, you can build it however you like, and if it falls apart, it's your problem. But if we build a casket or buy one, which we tend to buy, not build, and it falls apart, then we are subject to fines for not actually having it engineered properly. So all of our manufacturers have stringent engineering standards to achieve. Now, just talking about caskets, you can build your own. You can buy a kit set from us, for instance. If you don't want to actually do the engineering, but you want to actually, how do you build a kit set but make sure it's still strong? That's what I've got here to show you today. So when we're finished talking, if anyone wants to come and join me, we're going to put this one together. This one is built without nails. It's all interjoining. It uses a CNC router to make sure it fits perfectly. And you can actually, you're literally using a rubber hammer, bang it all together and lock it into place. So you know that this casket is engineered to actually withstand lifting a body up to, they are all engineered for different weights. Sorry, I'm not going to ask anybody their weight today. But this is engineered to take with a handle up to 80 kg. But if you're not using handles, if you're just lifting the casket, which we generally do with this one, then it'll take up to 110. Whereas most of our other ones take up to 160. So it's the cheapest bottom of the range casket. That's $799, including GST. If you're ever talking about prices with funeral directors, a lot of them talk plus GST, and a lot of the suppliers or people you're buying pieces from talk plus GST, but we always include GST. So there's nothing hidden. It's total cost. Again, funeral directors around the country get different raps, good or bad, for the casket. I don't know why it's the thing that gets focused on, but a lot of advertising and marketing from organisations say, you can't buy a casket from a funeral director for less than $2,000, pretty common. One of our opposition here in Kapiti Coast, their cheapest one is $1,965. So it's under $2,000, just to try and sneak under that marketing. We've always had cheaper caskets. We've got 5 caskets under $2,000, and that's our cheapest one at $799. The reason why there is a huge difference in funeral directors is because they all have different overheads. And in New Zealand, just over, I think it's 26% of the companies are owned by corporations, to Australian corporations, but they actually own more than 50% of the funerals. So the corporations come in and buy the bigger funeral homes that are doing more work. So they control more than half the market in New Zealand. And because they're market driven, their prices are a lot higher. When they buy a funeral firm, and I know lots of my colleagues over the years have been bought out, they literally come in, double the prices and half the staff. So you lose half the professional service and you pay twice as much. We are independent. There are less and less of us, mostly smaller companies. We're actually one of the few medium companies still around. So talking about caskets, you can build your own. If you do, my advice is very simple. Come and see us, have a look at ours, pull it apart in your brain. Please don't actually pull it apart. See how it's made so you can actually emulate that. I'll be up to standard. Thanks, Fran. If you don't want to, but you'd just really like the idea of buying one that's engineered right, we've got not just this one, but ones made up as well that you can buy. And a lot of people will paint those or decorate them or write on them or put messages on them. or a lot of people will line them themselves. This kit set, funnily enough, I got the pictures wrong way around. This is the kit set one here. But the kit set one, for instance, comes with a liner, waterproof liner, which is legal. You have to have a waterproof liner on the bottom. Comes with a side sheets, which is the decorative part, and obviously a pillow. So it comes ready to go. The only thing it doesn't come with is a nameplate. So legally in a casket, there are two things you need. One is a waterproof liner, and the other is a name. Has to be named so that it can be identified. And that comes back from the regulation from 1946, which is when you buried a casket, if they had to disinter you for legal reasons, so suddenly they decided you were murdered or something, they have to be able to identify that casket by the name. So it can't just be written on in biro. It has to be engraved or burnt or in a form that won't deteriorate. So with ours, we either engrave them, or with our wooden caskets, my son lasers the nameplate, or we use a laminate that goes over the top so it keeps it for a reasonable number of years. So, and the last one, of course, is if there's no DIY, then obviously you just come and choose one from us, and it is ready to go with everything, including that nameplate and all the lining. Yes, because I'm a greenie, all of our caskets have been made of ply since 2007. I was the first in New Zealand to go completely pine, and part of that was the ply one, which is this one is a ply pine. So it's made with non-toxic resins, water-based resins, and it comes out of a company in Nelson. They're the only ones in New Zealand who make those. So yes, they're all suitable for natural burial. The natural burials don't like plastic handles, so some of our caskets in the mid-range have a plastic handle, but funnily enough, the ones we buy are biodegradable plastic handles. So they will still break down in natural burial. It's just because some companies don't use those that they outlaw them with the natural burial. Yes, so we've got one that has a rope handle. It took us about a year to get right with our manufacturer because the first one was too skinny. The next one we had a block in the middle, but people crushed their fingers with the block. I could actually show you one at the end, but the one we use now, we use marine rope, which is about, well, it's actually slightly fatter than that. You can just get your hand around it. And because it's so stiff, the piece we put inside, we turn the corner and come in about 6 inches on either side and bracket it. So it's really strong, but it never hits the casket because it's so thick. When you're holding it, you actually don't hurt your hands. So, yeah. And again, it's about having a look at what's available and doing it. It's expensive buying rope that thick, but it's real rope too. It's organic rope, not plastic. Yeah. So we have our rope handles, we have our plastic handles, have metal handles, and we have wooden handles. So wooden handles are what we call D handles. So they're a rounded shaped handle with a insert inside. Actually, the D-shaped handles are you can't buy separately. They actually attach them when they build the casket, and they're all bolted from the inside. Rope's probably the strongest, to be honest, from a weight-bearing perspective. So we have oversized caskets in our stock as well for people who are bigger. And funnily enough, the rope is easier to carry because it's so robust in a bigger casket. No. Plastic's cheap. Yeah, everything organic's more expensive. When we started doing pine caskets, MDF caskets, which are the most common, sort of like the lot of the IKEA furniture or the stuff you get at the warehouse is made of MDF. We used to call it Weet-Bix board. You know, it gets wet and it falls apart and swells. When we first did that, I said to the pine manufacturer, it was in 2007 that he finally finished our range, and he was a pine furniture maker. And he said, I can never beat that price. I said, I don't want you to beat it, I just want you to get close. And because he started making them on scale, he actually managed to get them down to $100 more than an MDF. And within time, he started making the board himself, and he got it right down to within about $20 more. And so we just absorbed the $20 and said to people, do you want that or do you want that? Same price. Because I really wanted to go with organic for everything. So all of our caskets are pine or pine ply. Yeah. Yes. Yep. So it's just a standard finish. You need to seal it first. We carry a couple in stock, not of that one, but the next one up, which is the shaped casket, and it's pre-sealed already, so you can just it's a grey seal, you just paint it from there. But you can certainly seal it yourself, that's not a problem. We use a lot of those at the crematorium when we've got private funerals, and the grandchildren will come up and put handprints on, and people will come up and write a message. It's really nice for writing on. It's just lightly sanded, but enough that it's not going to give you a splinter. But it looks really nice. Good question. No, a dead weight is a dead weight. Everyone's heard of that. That's been around for thousands of years, but a dead weight is literally the weight that doesn't give you any assistance. So, when someone's asleep, they've actually got some tension in their muscles, so actually they're lighter than when someone is unconscious or dead. It's the same dead weight. Yeah, so embalming doesn't change it at all. No. You weigh the same, sadly. Exactly the same. And just quickly, the physics behind why a handle takes slightly less than the whole casket is because the handle's held in with screws, and it's the thickness of the pine ply. So that's the limitation, whereas when you hold it underneath, you've got the weight of the ply and the weight of the ply, so you've got a lot more structure to hold. That casket, no, but I can write you some if you need them. It's if you stay around to watch me put it together later, it's simple as stand it up, knock it in, put the next side in, knock it in, put the ends on, knock them down, and that's it. Yeah. But the same, we would do it for you for the same price. Yeah. The next one up, which is probably the next most common, is $1,200. So $400 more, but it's structurally thicker and more sound, and is actually pre-built. It's not a kit set. Build your own? Who knows? Depends what you're building it out of. I've had people come very excitedly to me and say, "We built this for $800." And I say, "What about your labour?" "Well, obviously that's free." I said, "Well, you could have bought one for $800 and not spent 3 days building it." So yes, the funeral homes that charge $2,000, it's always going to be cheaper to build your own. So no, you can't have a bag. It has to have, for burial or cremation, you have to have what's called a suitable receptacle, which is defined in law as being able to be flat and be able to carry the weight of a body. So you can have what they call a shroud bearer. So a shroud bearer looks a little bit like an Indian cocoon. So it's sort of shaped like that, and you shroud the person and put it on, and then you strap them over the top with lovely ropes or lace or whatever you like. They're about $2,000 to buy. So it's much, if you're using us, it's much cheaper to use a casket. If you're using other funeral homes, be wary, it can be cheaper to buy a shroud bearer. Good question, yeah. The burial versus cremation thing is pretty much the same. Both have to have a suitable receptacle, and it's the same thing. It has to have a flat bottom on it. We have had home-built caskets where they've sort of put wood and built the base on the wood, and then it's not got a flat bottom. So it's very hard. You can't roll it into a cremator, for instance. That's done on a series of rollers. If it's got timber on the bottom and then a floor, like you build a floor in a house, it doesn't work. It's got to be the other way around. It's got to be flat on the bottom. A slide board, yes, we use them for our stretchers. Yep. No, it's got to have an upturn, so you can't roll off. So, the trouble, we've tried that before. The problem with that is the tape then goes underneath. Then you're catching the tape and you're breaking the tape when you're moving them. So it's got to have an upturn. We have trays that we use for international travel, and they are under the same regulation. So they have an edge around them, and they have the handhold in the edge, and then the strapping can go through the handhold. It's got to have nothing on the bottom. Yeah, slide boards we use all the time for our stretchers, same thing, but they're only good for pulling someone over with two people sort of holding them and guiding them, but you certainly can't carry with them. Yeah, not for any length of time. And they don't have to have a lid, so, which is a good point. We were just sort of raising it. There's nothing in the law that says has to have a lid. We just do that for dignity. And why do we do that for dignity? Because we've always done it. But we certainly have done burials with shroud boards. There's nothing wrong with that either. It's just something that's growing. Right. Is that the next one? Yep. Paperwork. So with doing DIY, you can do all the paperwork yourself. Sometimes people like to do some of the paperwork, so they engage us to help them with it. And most of the time, to be honest, people just want us to do it all. but it is certainly something you can do yourself. When I say sourcing it yourself, it's getting the forms yourself, lodging them yourself, and that includes things like registering the death, attending to the doctor to get the medical certificates, and with cremation, attending to the medical referee. He's the person that okays the application from the family, which we would fill out with you, and he okays the medical certificates and signs another set of papers called the referee papers. So that's something that most people don't want to do, but some people who love admin, there's no reason why they can't do it. So sometimes people do their homework first and obtain all the documents themselves and will follow that through themselves. If you're completely DIY, that's fine. Some people come to us and say, we want to do it ourselves, but we want some guidance. Obviously, we charge a little bit for the guidance. It's all done on time. So if we're sitting with you for 2 hours, we'll charge you 2 hours. If we're sitting with you for 1 hour, we'll charge you 1 hour. If you come back 4 times and it's half an hour, then it's 2 hours. Nothing's for free, except for the general advice like I'm giving you now. So, I mean, that's how we are in business. But a lot of funeral homes, again, I don't want to diss any other funeral homes, but we will do little bits with you. If you want a journey and come and just use us for certain pieces, that's totally acceptable by us. Other funeral homes say, no, you either do it yourself or we do it. And if we do it, this is our fee. We have a progressive fee, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute too. So any questions about documentation? I didn't talk about burial. If it's the same thing, you've still got the minimum documents of the death registration, the medical referee, but the medical referee then becomes your burial warrant instead of your medical referee, which is, again, done online. Just a little thing to mention while I'm talking about documents, and I've preached this for a long time and it still doesn't get through to most people, but I'm going to say it anyway. The death certificate is not what the doctor signs. Doctors always say, I will sign the death certificate, which throws people into a spin. They don't. They sign the medical certificate as to the cause. That goes with the details that we get from you as a family to register the death with births, deaths, and marriages, which when you think about it is really obvious, births, deaths, and marriages. And they issue the death certificate. So it doesn't exist actually until we can actually state online when we lodge the document that the person has been buried or cremated. So we can't get the death certificate the day you die. It's the day that you're buried or cremated. We can then lodge the application online, and then it will come within 4 or 5 working days. So in this document, this is one that we always have at reception. It's the most commonly asked questions. What are the questions being asked by the registrar? And these are the questions, so I'll let you steal those. So it's everything about the person that's died. So often people say, what's that question referring to? If you always think about, I'll just say Great Aunt Joe. So if Great Aunt Joe has died and you're organising it, the questions are about Great Aunt Joe, not about you. So where was Great Aunt Joe born? Where was Great Aunt Joe married? Who was Great Aunt Joe married to? If you don't know them, if it's birth information, the registrar's system now contains all the birth certificates in New Zealand. So we quite often get a family saying they were born in Invercargill, and then you get back the certificate and the registrar's corrected it and said they're actually born in Gore. So they will change birth information to make sure it's correct, but that's all. They haven't got any marriage stuff in there at the moment. It'll be another 10 years probably till all that's in there. So if you get it wrong, you get it wrong. The trick with getting it right is filling this out now and not only keeping it in a nice, safe place, but if you're using us, give us a copy. About 50% of the people who tell their families, I've got all this sorted, the families can't find the information. So if you give it to us, I've got about 500 people's files upstairs just in sleeves. It's really simple because families are surprised. Really good example. My mother-in-law, when she was alive, she ended up with an operation on her neck. It was quite urgent, ended up in hospital. We rushed in to find her. There was no record of her because both her daughter, my wife, and me thought her name was Elizabeth Margaret Clements, but her legal name is Margaret Elizabeth Clements. Typical English, the same name's carried on down, but they switch it round depending on the generation. So you'd be amazed how many people get the information wrong if it's not you. You'll get it right because you know. But your children, grandchildren, partner, nephew, niece, they won't necessarily have it right. So write it down, pop it somewhere safe, and if you're interested in using us, please make sure you give us a copy too. Just a matter of bringing it in and we'll photocopy it. If you want to do it yourself, keep it somewhere safe. The only thing I'd encourage you not to do is fill it out on the Registrar General's. There is a paper version of the form. We do it all online nowadays. You can lodge a paper version. Well, you can't really. You use the paper version online, so it's a PDF writer, so you've got to put it in that way. But the same questions are on that form. The problem with that form is they change it every now and again. The questions tweak. Whenever they tweak, we'll know. It's simple things like we didn't need to know the people's occupation. It was only ever the male's occupation, not the female's occupation. How sexist that is. So finally that was changed, and now we have both. And now they go right back to what their occupation was for the parents. So if it's your parents you're organising, it's their parents. So it goes back a generation and plus. Is that clear as mud? The questions are all there. So I had a friend who died a couple of weeks ago. He was only 44, and I was talking to his widow now. The funeral was last Monday. He died in Australia, and she said, "I'm so thankful he knew you." He was a drummer in one of our church bands, and I played with him quite a bit. So glad he knew you because he told me what he wanted for his funeral. But if he hadn't known you, we would have never written anything down. We would have never talked about it because he's way too young. We wouldn't have even thought of it. So, yeah, we had some great music at his funeral. I think documentation, I think that's probably all. If you understand, the doctor's certificate is the doctor's certificate, not the death certificate. That comes later, and it comes through the registrar. Yeah. Well, that's exactly my point. You can't get a death certificate until afterwards, but you can get a doctor's certificate. So you need to get the doctor's certificate. In fact, the doctor has to be assured that they're going to sign. We have to either talk to them or see it online before we're even allowed to transfer the deceased anywhere. Yep. So the death certificate won't exist until we can lodge it online, and we can't lodge it online until after the funeral. And if they're getting things like compassionate fares, which Air New Zealand does compassionate fares, they just have to have an internal document from us. We just send them. So there's lots of ways around needing that death certificate because it doesn't exist till afterwards. So. Good, really good question. So we watch way too much American TV. So in America, you have a reading of the will after the funeral. In New Zealand, it's not a secret. You can read it straight away when they're dead. It's the executor, whoever's appointed in that will, is in charge, and they should already have a copy. Anyone else in the family, if the executor wants them to see it, you can see it anytime. You can see it before you die, if the executor lets you. So it's not the same rule as we see on American TV. There's not a big sit-down meeting after the funeral and, sorry, you only got the dog and you got the house. None of that happens in New Zealand. It's all documented beforehand, and the executor is the person in charge. So sometimes it's called a trustee. If you've got a will, it's always the first clause. I hereby appoint Andrew, my trustee and executor, for my will. Now, if you are the trustee and executor, that means you're in charge of all the financial decisions, which include property, obviously, but also include the funeral because you've got to pay for it, unless you are completely DIYing it, and then the executor doesn't have the say. It's the nearest next of kin, which comes under the Administration Act, and the Administration Act states who the next of kin is in legal order. Try not to blind you with too much stuff. But in short, yes, you can have a will anytime. You don't have to wait for a fancy reading of the will. Transport is probably, after the casket, the most common thing that people think they'd quite like to do themselves for DIY. So you can completely do all the transport yourself on the left there. You can even turn up at the hospital with your station wagon and bring your mum round to the door here, or take her straight home, or whatever you're going to do. There is no legal, as long as you're within the Health Act. So if the body is contained in a container that's not going to cause any leakage. We had a gentleman who turned up here at 9 o'clock one night with his wife in the front seat who died. You hear those stories, this was real. It was an expected death, and his brain told him he had to bring her to the funeral home. It's just what he wanted to do. So he popped her in the seat and continued to knock on the door for quite a long time until he realised the sign said, "We close at 5 o'clock and please ring this number for the after hours team." So someone came down and met him at night, and first had to actually say, "Look, I just before we take your wife inside, I do need to ring the doctor and make sure this is kosher. And the reason behind that is because if the doctor can't sign a certificate, the coroner is involved. Justice Department looks after that, which means the police have to attend, and we're not allowed to do anything till they've given us a clearance. So there's a little bit of a sticky line there. If you hear someone say, "Has the doctor been?" They go, "No." You say, "Has the doctor been informed?" "No, we can't come. We can't do anything till the doctor not only has been informed, but has said, yes, I will sign the certificate." In fact, in law, they have to sign it before we actually go, but we trust our local doctors. So, and sometimes they'll come to the funeral home and attend the next day if they don't want to come out in the middle of the night. We do have to know they're going to sign it, otherwise we're in trouble with the coroner. And their fines start at $75,000, so I'm not keen to pay any of those. Part DIY for transportation. We've had quite a few of these. I had one just a couple of weeks ago. We did the initial transfer from the place of death with our specialised equipment and vehicles, stretchers, etc. Brought them back here, did the embalming preparation for this particular family, and then they came in their van. And they had their own casket they built. They put them in their own casket and took them home. They then brought them to the church. I helped them at the church. And then they drove to the cemetery. I led them in my normal car. So they did 2 lots of transporting in their van, but we did the initial stuff that was a bit sticky for them. We had a gentleman about 8 or 9 months ago who was completely wanting to DIY his own partner's funeral. And sorry, it was his mother's funeral, and she had a pacemaker. And so he rang up and said, "I heard that you might be able to help me," told us the circumstance. I said, "Yep. If you want us to remove the pacemaker, there was a charge, $160, which is our standard hourly rate, including just." And I said, "You just bring mum here, let us know when you're coming so we can meet you at the back door, not the front door. It's a bit hard to bring mum through the front door. And we will do that for you, and an hour or so later you can come back and pick her up." In the end, he decided he didn't want to put her in his own wagon. It was a station wagon. He decided he'd rather we went and picked her up, and he followed us back. And when he'd followed us back, he then decided that he wanted to buy a kit set casket from us. He was going to buy it from somewhere else, but it was more expensive, so he chose one of ours. We ended up putting it together with him, which was quite therapeutic for him. And then we put mum in the casket. And then he wasn't actually ready to take her home, so he left, went home and came back the next day and took her home. So it's lovely from my perspective, not from a money perspective, but from an emotional perspective. It's really nice to be able to sort of dovetail in with whatever bits people want to do themselves. Because sometimes people think they can, and then they can't. And that's fine. We're there to keep filling in those gaps whenever they need it. Yeah. So with a cremation, or was it a burial? With cremation, you have to fill in on the application for cremation if there is a pacemaker or cardiac aid. So if you put yes, then we know, the doctor should know and tell us as well. So there's a double check there, and then we remove it. It does, yeah. So some of them have little nuclear power packs in them, and they'll make the cremator go boom. Yeah. So as far as I know, no cremator's ever gone off in my cremator. Otherwise, I would have known about it. There are some new ones that have just been out about 2 years, and they're called micro pacemakers, and they actually insert them in the heart or just on the outside of the heart. So it's a little surgical procedure, whereas the old pacemakers just sat under the skin and a wire went down to the heart. These new ones, in law, we're supposed to take them out, but how we're going to do that without doing a heart operation, which is, so we've been fighting with the health department about the law, and they've now given us just about a month ago an exemption to leave these in, because when they blow up, they just go pop, because they're so tiny, and it's not going to hurt any equipment at all. So, and of course, the third part of it is when we do all the transport at both ends. The reason that some hearses the hearse hire can be expensive, obviously with this equipment, we've got specialised decks and specialised stretchers. We're not the ambulance service who gets money from the government. We've got to fund it all ourselves or from our clients. But our hearses, for instance, are stretched vehicles, specialised stretched vehicles. The 2 Bunce hearses we have, they came out as SS Utes in 2017. They stopped making SS Utes, so we bought the last 2 in the country, got them made through the Bunce company, who had a special patent for making that particular vehicle into a hearse. They cut it in half, so you pay $75,000 for a vehicle, brand new. They then chop it up, which is quite depressing. They add another 8 to 10 inches on it. They put in one-piece windows. They redo all the deck, and they sell it back to you for another $75,000, so $150,000 worth of vehicle times 2. So yeah, that's why hearses are expensive. This one we've drawn a picture of what a station wagon looks like when it's not extended, so it still has the door in the back, but our ones don't. They're longer than that and have these one-piece windows. You see them on TV often. So in a normal Falcon wagon or something similar length, there's not many vehicles similar length, you can fit a 5'10" casket in, but you can't fit a 6'1" in easily unless you put it between the front 2 seats, which is not what we would do with our hearses. So ours have a proper safety barrier behind the seat so the casket can't go back or forward. So yeah, I just thought we'd throw that picture in just to sort of show you. There is a company in Kapiti Coast who hires a hearse, Angel Wings, I think they're called. It's a Maori lady who did it specifically for the marae, and she does rent it out to anyone else to borrow if they want. It is just a Falcon wagon, so it does have limitations, but that is available. I don't know what she charges, but it's probably about half what we would charge because the vehicle's worth about an eighth of what ours is. Yes. Yep, you can put anything in the casket as long as it hasn't got a battery. And we prefer no glass. So glass is stone. So when it melts in the cremator, it just turns into a lump on the hearth. And then when you try and pull it out, it breaks pieces of the hearth away. So what we tend to say, if you've got glasses, if they're real glasses, not plastic ones, there's a lot of composite plastic ones now. But if you've got real glasses, we ask if we can take them off. And then we give them to the Lions Club, who send them off to the islands. In fact, if anyone's got any spare pairs, you can drop them into the office anytime rather than throw them away. I think we've got about 100 up there now to give away to them. It's a really nice thing to be able to do. So you've always been able to do transportation yourselves. They will often recommend, if you're going from the hospital with anyone, that you get a professional to do it because you don't want to mess. To say we're quite happy to fit in with you as much as is going to help. Yeah. When my daughter lost twins 2 years ago, just about now, they lived for 13 days and then they were prem and they died. And her in-law he's a policeman, and they'd never really dealt with death before, whereas my daughter had worked at a funeral home in Palmerston North. And it was very, very easy. She goes, all right, we're taking them from the ward. We're just going to take them straight home. And the nurses said the same thing. They said, oh, are you sure you don't want to use a funeral director? She goes, I am a funeral director. And they were just delighted with the way she treated it as naturally as anything. She carried them. She didn't put them in a special container or anything. We made a little casket at home for them, put them both in together. It was lovely. And then they couldn't understand why we were keeping them overnight at home. Why weren't we taking them and leaving at the funeral home? I said, no, that's what we do with all our family. We just keep them at home. Usually we embalm them. We didn't with the babies because they were so small, and we had a little funeral 2 days later. And their grief journey, they keep telling us every time they visit, which is reasonably often, how much that helped them, realising they didn't have to follow these funny traditions from our past, which actually aren't that old. Most of our older traditions are exactly that tradition of keeping the deceased with you. We think the Maori have wonderful traditions. Well, most of those are European traditions they adopted when we came. So Maori people never took someone home. The Europeans always took people home. The Maori took them to the marae. And it was only when the European came that they decided they were allowed to take them home. Interesting how it changed. The funerals in England, you always get them at home in the front parlour. In fact, they didn't even leave the home traditionally. The embalmer went to the home with his portable equipment, set it up in the bathroom, and did the embalming at home so the deceased didn't have to leave. So, and the Irish, I mean, everyone knows about the Irish wake. You know, they're in a casket the night before, and you're all having blooming glasses of Guinness and putting it on the casket. You know, they stayed there the whole time, and then you travelled with them to the venue. So those traditions are in every culture all around the world, funnily enough. And again, with the Maori, it was too, because you lived in the marae area So you literally took them straight from wherever they died to the marae, to the meeting house. So that's the tradition's pretty much the same everywhere. We just lost it a bit when we came to New Zealand. We slowly lose traditions and then wonder why it doesn't always work. Yeah. No, you don't. The problem is if you don't do something practical, it's okay at this time of year when it's freezing cold, but in the summer or even the autumn or the spring, it's the body will take its natural course. Now the big problem, I know what you're going to say, is how long can we keep them at home before you have to do something? Totally depends on what they've died of. Totally depends on their body condition. For instance, most people in the last year of their life have more pharmaceuticals than the rest of their life put together. So most people, when they come to us, are shaking like a box of pills. You know, their blood is not normal blood anymore. It's full of pharmaceutical toxins. So the body breaks down a lot quicker. So the more things you're on to keep you alive, the more problem you're going to have when you die. And the cause of death obviously changes as well. People don't realise that death actually is not just alive dead. There's actually 3 stages of death. The first stage of death is clinical death. That's when your heart, your lungs, and your brain stops, but the rest of your body can function. So a really good example of clinical death is anything you can be brought back to life. So what's something where you can die but be brought back to life? Anyone? Drowning. Perfect. So your lungs have stopped, your heart and your brains have stopped because your lungs have stopped, but if you can start them up again, you're back alive. Yeah. The other classic one, electrocution, heart attack. Yep. Yeah. When your heart stops, you had a heart attack and you do CPR, they're clinically dead, but you can bring them back. Not always, but so those are 2 examples of clinical death. So the rest of your body functions. So if you're clinically dead and you've been dead for a quarter of an hour, 20 minutes, they've tried, you can't bring them back to life. You sit someone like that in a chair, walk up and bang them on the knee, you know that reaction that you do this? It still happens because your nerves are still alive. Your capillaries are still functioning. Your brain might have stopped and your heart stopped and your lungs stopped, which is the real you, but your body, which is your transport in life, part of it's still functioning. And so the second stage of death is biological death. That's where your liver, your kidneys, and all those organs shut down. And when all of those nerves and major organs shut down, then you won't have those responses. So you've all heard stories over the years where somebody groaned or moved or twitched. You know, that is possible in that first stage of death, moving into the second stage of death. The last stage of death is cellular death or decomposition. You cannot be brought back at that point, no matter how many funny Dracula stories you hear or whatever. You cannot come back from decomposition. But if you think about what cancer is dying cells while you're still alive. So it's decomposition of a cell while you're still alive. So if you die with cancer, if it's depends on the cancer. If it's leukemia, it's different. Most cancers, you are already partly dead when you die. So if you say, how long can you keep someone at home with cancer? We've had people who've kept them overnight and the decomposition's been ramped by the next morning. But if you died of a heart attack and you kept them for 3 days at home, they're probably fine. And that's one of the biggest problems we have, people saying, how long can we keep them at home? You're going, can I ask some questions first? And even then, it's only advice, maybe 2 days. And they go, well, and someone else goes, I kept my mum at home for 4 days. She was fine. It's like, there's always one. Because it's probably true. Just if you're healthy, it sounds really weird, but if you're healthy when you die, you'll be able to keep kept at home a lot longer. But there are lots of different treatments you can do. Obviously, embalming's not the only one. You can use ice, which does make a wet mess. Dry ice is my favorite. I really like dry ice because it's minus 72 degrees and it goes straight from ice to vapor, CO2, dry ice, so there's no wet stage. So dry ice is really good. I've got a whole training program if anyone's interested in doing dry ice. I've got little kits you can buy, use the essential oils. The longest I've kept someone with dry ice at home was 10 days, and the son helped me each day treat with some more dry ice. You put them in bags and put them around the body. He looked as good after 10 days as the day he died. Fantastic. There's lots of tricks I've learned over the years to make that happen. I'm not going to reveal all of those tricks now, so don't ask me. But if you want to know, I've got a kit and I can explain it for dry ice. I don't know how we got onto onto that. I didn't really talk actually in my brochure about do-it-yourself preparation of the deceased, but it's this is something you can do. I do know a lot of groups used to use hot water bottles and fill them up with water and freeze them, and that stopped the ice melting everywhere, but it still does get wet. Your clothes will get wet and the casket can get wet. The worst one I ever had, they filled the casket with ice, and when I went to go back 2 days later, they'd kept filling it with ice and the whole bottom had frozen and cracked, and we needed to buy a new casket. So people think they know better. They don't always. So flowers, maybe a really simple one. DIY, pick some flowers from your own garden. You don't have to spend a lot at the florist. I have seen people who want to buy lots of flowers but have a limited budget. I said, why don't you go to the supermarket? You can buy them half the price from the florist. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with florists. We love them. They do us great favours in an emergency. And I don't think they make a lot of money either. But if you want us to do it, we get it straight from the florist. I do have quite a big garden at home, so if someone's worried, I sometimes raid that with flowers and things. We have a big rosemary bush out the back that we raid all the time when people say, oh, can we have some little flowers to put on the casket? They go, we can do some rosemary, free. Poor rosemary bush gets attacked all the time. So yes, if we're doing anything, and I have to be specific, thank you, Fran, I see you in the corner of my eye. In our funeral home, we don't put any markups on anything. So if we organise flowers for you, we literally organise $200 worth of flowers. That's the bill you get on our bill. A lot of funeral homes do put a markup, like a builder would put a markup on timber or whatever. So if they were buying $200 worth of flowers, they might charge you $3. They all have different markups on different things. We don't. We have no markups on anything. Whatever you want us to get for you, it's at cost. Service sheets. So you're familiar with the little brochures that you get at funerals, which look very much like the one you've got in your hand. We have a picture of the deceased, perhaps 2 or 3 pictures on the inside, the order of the service, etc. There's more and more young people who've got skill to do it themselves, and they often come and say, I've designed the service sheet, can you print it for me? Or they'll go off and design it and print it themselves. I did have a gentleman who asked us to design it, but he wanted to go and print it himself, which I hadn't had that very often. So it was sort of back to front. We spent the time with our designer, which is always a lot longer than you think, because you have an initial design, he comes back, changes, I want that font now, not that font, can you move that picture from there to there? There's a lot of fluffing around with the service brochure. And then he said, I'm going to go off and print it myself. So we gave him 1 copy to go and photocopy. Came back very proud of himself. He'd printed all these wonderful copies. It only cost him $3.50 per sheet, because normally it was $4 and he got a discount. I said, but we only charge $2.50. So he hadn't asked us in the first place, because we don't try and make a whole lot of money on those extras. We just try and make a little bit more than costs. So when there's a mistake overrun, we can actually absorb that as well. So just when I say DIY, I say just always ask. I think that's the key. Just rather than he just assumed that we were going to be more expensive, so we often got a price somewhere else without even asking us what the price was. If he asked us and ours was more expensive, that's fine. But he just assumed, so he got himself in trouble. One of the things that's reasonably common is working with our designer. So the family might say, we can do it ourselves. I had this twice last week. And then the day before they went, we've run out of time. Can your designer do it? So they gave us all the elements, all the photos, the order that they'd started but not got very far with. And then he took it all and created a service sheet, gave them a couple of design options. They tweaked a little bit and then we printed it. We're fine with doing that. Whatever works with the family. The only thing we don't like is getting that at 5 o'clock when the funeral's the next day at 10 o'clock, because my designer's gone home and he will not work after hours. We can sometimes do it, but not as good as he can. And of course, the last one is where we design it completely. You just tell us what you want, tell us what photos you want, and we will design it, give you some options, work with you, and then get your proof before we print it. So yeah, those are the steps. Obviously, there's no charge for that. Obviously, there's a part charge for that, and obviously we charge for all our time with that. So very practical. And we encourage you to do whatever works with your family. If you get a grandchild that says, I want to do the service sheet, if you trust them, let them do it. But keep up your sleeve that if they get stuck, that's what we're there for as well. Photo tribute's the same. We get a lot of younger people now who want to do the photo tribute. That's the slides that go up during the service. They might scan their own photos. They might have some digitally. They might have their own piece of music. Sometimes they will think that means bringing the photos on a USB to us with the music on a playlist or something. That's not actually making a photo tribute. That's just giving us the photos and the music. What we do is we put it into a movie. So we create the photos into a movie that has the music with it, so it all fits seamlessly. So when it starts, and when it finishes at the end of the music. So if somebody wants to do that themselves, again, we would say that's fine. We just talk them through what we want to make it work properly. And sometimes there's a bit of a mix. They might say, look, here's our USB with all our photos. Here's 3 photo albums with the last 10. Can you do that one, that one, that one, that one? And we scan them, and then we add them, and then we find out what music they want. And then we actually have what's called a one music license, which means we can play any piece of music, just about any piece of music. There's a couple protected, but also means we can record it like we're doing today. Whereas if you haven't got a one music license, YouTube will chop you off after 30 seconds and you'll have no music. We have a license, so we can play the whole piece of music, and it can be recorded and broadcast, which is very common at funerals now. Yeah, any questions on those? I suppose the only other story to tell you was I had a funeral a little while ago, and the daughter thought she was very clever, did the whole slideshow and everything herself, came in with it on a USB, and there was nothing on there but a link. And the link was going to a free piece of software she'd used, which of course we couldn't use. It was just some, you can get free things online. And she's very sad. We try and have a practice the day before so we can overcome those things. She was confident it was going to work an hour before the funeral. When she turned up, it didn't work. So she decided she wanted to go home and get her computer and run it from there, but it still wouldn't work. I don't know what was going on, but that's the risk. Whenever we do have those risk factors, we often say, perhaps we could just meet the afternoon before at 4 o'clock and go through the AV. It's the sound and the electronic stuff that's often the key. It totally depends on how much time we end up. I had a funeral the other day who they literally did ring at about 5:15 on Friday. I was about to go home, and the funeral was the next morning. They said, "Oh look, we've finally finished scanning all the photos, except the ones in the album. I've finished sorting all the photos, sorry, electronically, except for the ones in the album. Can you scan them?" I said, "It's Friday night. I can't get anyone else back, and I'm going out shortly." And they said, "Oh, please, please, please." So in the end, I cancelled my Friday night appointment, which my wife was not very happy with. And I was there till about 11 o'clock getting it right the next morning. So if I'm there till 11 o'clock at night, I'm going to charge. It's what you do. And sadly, it costs more after hours than it does during hours. And if I'd called someone else, and they would have got charged twice, but I ended up charging them. So yeah, it depends when. If it's an hour's work, we charge you an hour. If it's 2 hours work, we charge 2 hours. I think on our what's our standard? What we would charge? We would normally charge 2 hours, and that's doing it from scratch. Yeah, we'd normally charge 2 hours for this, so it's $320, including just. We would charge. Sometimes it can be more. Might do 4 hours doing a part one, then we could have done it in 2, because we've got the tech. We can scan 6 photos at once in 10 seconds, as opposed to coming in. And the worst one for families is they're almost there. I say, "Can we just come in and sort the order?" 3 hours later, "Oh, I want that one before that one now. Oh, and I want that one over there." Whereas if they can do that themselves at home and put them into an order, it's a lot less time for us. So a lot less charge. Yeah. So we give an estimate right at the start. So we basically, at the first interview, we sit down with you, find out what you want, and then we would give you an idea of cost, either right there and then, or we'd go back and work it out. If we don't get enough information at that first interview, because sometimes people can't decide on a whole lot of things, then we often go back a second time, get the rest of the information, or by phone or by email, and then give an estimate. And at the end of the day, if our estimates guessed a bit low, we usually just leave it there and don't charge any extra. So we tend to try and we guesstimate normally in four stages. But if you are really doing it yourself and you're really saying, I don't want to come and see you, I just want to do it myself and ring you for bits and pieces, then we only charge you for those bits and pieces. And we tell you each time. So really good question. Can I come back to that? Because I've got a whole screen on that. That's a great question though. So 2 more to go. The venue, your source, your own venue. So it might be at home or it might be a hall or something like that. But just the trick behind that is making sure you are organising not just the place, but the fact it's got chairs and a lectern and a sound system and all that sort of thing. Quite often with people when they used to use public halls, they'd go, oh, your chapel's $500. I can hire the hall down the road for $150. But by the time they'd organised the chairs and the lectern and the sound system, they're up to $1,000. So it can be a trap. That's what I'm saying. It's sometimes not as clever as you think you are. And the venue for a church, for instance, if you have your own church, that's great. If you're organising that, we don't have to organise that. Quite often there'll be people in your church or your organisation, might be the bowling club or wherever, and there are people there who can help with the sound and who can help set up the chairs and all that sort of thing. Fantastic. We're working with them. But if we have to, like we've gone to the golf club, we had to take our own sound system, set all the chairs up ourselves, take our own lectern, take our own tables, etc., etc. So it was more work for us doing that than having it here. Even though their venue was free, we then had to charge extra time with extra staff to do that. So it was about the same. Didn't really save them any money. But they wanted it there, so it was important. So I'm not saying it should all be always about money. Sometimes it's about what's right for that person. And of course, as I say, this is our chapel in cartoon form, and everything is set in here already. The only thing you pay extra in our chapel is if you stream. That's because we have to pay for the stream. So that's on charge, and the editing of that for a video afterwards. But other than that, it's we just spent a whole lot of money doing this up again recently, $150,000. The cameras alone, $35,000. So yeah, there's a lot of cost in sound and AV and equipment. So. And the last one was organising a celebrant. So some people choose just to, if they're having something at home or an odd venue, they might DIY and just go and find their own celebrant or a friend or something to do it. What we find often, if it's not a celebrant but a friend or an acquaintance, if they haven't done a funeral before, they're quite lost. So quite often this one is, when they are DIYing, we often end up saying, how about you get them to give us a ring and we'll sit down and have a conversation and talk them through the specific elements that they should be doing. I think the earliest one I did with one of these where the family had the person organise themselves was the first funeral I ever did as a celebrant, which I wasn't a celebrant, I was a funeral director. But this fellow was taking the funeral, he turned up on the day, didn't want to talk to me beforehand. The family said, no, we're saving that cost. Our friend's going to do it all. I got here, I said, now, what do you want me to do when you want people to stand and sit? This is the protocols. He goes, I'm just giving the eulogy. I'm not taking the service. That's your job. I said, no, it's not my job. You see, a funeral director is like, if you think of a show, when you go to a show, the actor is the celebrant. The director and the usher and the sound guy is the funeral director. He's the organizer. He's the stage manager. He's not the actor as well. You can be both. We would, if we're ever asked to take a funeral, which I am personally from time to time, I always have one or two funeral directors, usually one at the back and one doing the AV upstairs by remote. You can't, it's wearing too many hats. Falls apart. You're better to have a professional celebrant if you're going to do that. So yes, there's a gap in between, a DIY in between, where if someone's running it but they need some advice and some help, we'll sit down with them, but obviously we charge. Or we just get someone who is a professional and we will work with them, liaise with them. They will sit with the family. They will get us the order of service. We'll take it back to the family and send the celebrant copy as well, talk about any changes the day before, etc. So very much there are different steps. When we're involved, we want to make sure it's perfect. Obviously, family would prefer it's perfect too. So that's why we often end up somewhere in this in-between zone if it's a friend who's leading it. Totally different if it's a friend who's done this 6 times before. So if it is, that's absolutely fine. There's no legal requirement. There used to be. There is no longer. Yes, you used to have to be a marriage celebrant or a funeral celebrant. You had to have a license. A long time ago. Shows you how old I am. And the celebrant used to have to sign a form to say that they witnessed the burial or cremation, which they usually didn't. But yeah, no, there is no legal requirement any longer. Yep. You can do what you like. And I suppose my only warning is that if you do what you like, just realise that if the person you've thrown in the deep end needs a bit of help, then sometimes they might like to engage us to have a bit of help. Depends on the size of the funeral. If it's something at home with 10 people, it's totally different than something with 110 people. And having said that, our most common funeral now, almost 50% of them, is our small funerals at our crematorium, either with a celebrant or just with family sitting around sharing stories. The funny thing is we do find, not surprisingly, that when they just want to sit around and still tell stories, they still need some guidance. They still need someone to lead it. So we often try and encourage them to have either someone in the family or use a professional, or sometimes we end up playing part of that role. Not as a funeral celebrant, just as a bit of a talk and a guidance. Just to give you an example, had a dear old lady who died a while ago, and the family said, no, we don't want anything except we want to be there, and my brother-in-law is going to read a poem. And I thought, okay, that's fine. I'll encourage them sneakily to do something a bit more when they get there. And when they came here actually, and they sat in the front 2 rows, and I welcomed them. I thought they needed something to start. I explained that this person was going to read the poem, but if anyone else wanted to say anything, they could. And he read the poem, and then there was this bit of silence. And I said, do you mind if I just, before we finish, because we'd hardly started, can I just ask you a couple of questions? Now, I knew most of these answers because I'd taken those details for registration. Where was Mum born again? I knew she was born in England. And where did she go to school? And each time I asked a question, someone would tell a story. Oh, when she was at school, remember that story about... An hour later, I said, it's probably time we finished now. And I said some words to finish it off. So if that family had been left to their devices with a funeral director who was not that engaged, they would have had that one reading, and then just there would have been this emptiness. And I just give that warning because our Loss and Grief Centre that some of you are aware of across the road here, and there's some brochures on that here. This is our charitable trust, not our charitable trust, Loss and Grief Centre. This is where most of our profit goes to every year. The majority of people under longer term counselling care, so there's companioning, which is walking free with someone. We've got some volunteers who do that. Support groups, which are free, but the counsellors, we've got 3 counsellors who charge on contract. Majority of people are people who didn't have a funeral. It's all right for the person that's died, but it's not so much all right for the people left behind. And people forget in our society that the funeral is not for the living, it's for the dead, it's for the living. It's for those who are left behind. So that's a vital piece of information. These are our estimate form when we're doing a price for a funeral. Now, whether you're interested in price or not, it doesn't give you prices on it here. It's just where we fill it out. So if you said $300 worth of flowers, we'd write $300 worth of flowers. So that as a list gives you the sorts of things to think about. So if you are wanting to think about what can I DIY, I've hopefully picked out the main ones on that brochure, but here's a list of everything my brain can think of. This is what we use all the time. So if you want one of those, you're more than welcome to grab one of those. On the other side of that is our professional calculation sheet. So you'll see on here, just Josh, if you want to grab that pile and anyone wants one, they can have one. You don't have to have one of these, so just put your hand up if you want one. On the back is how we charge. So you see there 1s and 2s and 5s. So that's our unit price. So at the moment, our unit price is $160, including GST. So that's basically our overheads price. It doesn't include the chapel. We charge for that separately. So our $160 is based on about quarter of that is wages, quarter of that's taxes, so ESCT, GST, ACC, KiwiSaver, all that sort of stuff. And then the last half of that, the second $80 is overhead cost. For instance, my insurance bill was $60,000 last year. And the building's worth about $3 million, so we're still paying off debt with that. So that's our hourly rate charge. If you compare that with other funeral homes, most of them are about 185, 200 plus GST. So there's another $50, $60 per hour. And when you add that up, it does make a difference. And as I said, we don't put any markups on anything either. So I had an interesting case, and I probably shouldn't do this on film. Someone came to us the other day and been to an opposition firm, and they asked for a price on a funeral. We went through it. There is a booklet online. We guessed how many units they would want based on what they were telling us. So this is the guesses that we estimate you to start with when we give you an estimate. But if you have a lot more, we would tell you as you go and redo the estimate. And if you say, I don't want to pay that much, I don't want to do this, I want to do this myself and this myself, then we take it back and to the point that we've found common ground. But this particular family was a normal funeral. We were sitting at this sort of area of 30 units, plus they told us how many flowers, what casket they wanted, etc. And the bill came to nearly $12,000. And they said, oh, wow, really? I was thinking, oh, okay, maybe we should sharpen our pencil. They said, oh, we just went down the road and it was 21. Massive difference. And they couldn't work out what the difference was. First of all, they were not adding the GST because they thought our professional fee was only about $1,000 less than the others, but it was $1,000 plus GST. And they had markups on all the extra items, which we didn't. So it can make a big difference. So I'm not saying you have to use us, but if you are using another company, ask those questions. Be forewarned and forearmed. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yep. So, not so much scarce, but here, cremation or burial fees, you'll see on that sheet. We just put in whatever that is from the council. We don't put any markups on that. Our council, I'm going to guess now, you think they just put their prices up 1st of August, so you're too late for the cheap ones. The 3,711 is the burial fee locally here. No, every council has their own charge. In fact, we've been, as a national association, we've been doing media releases for the last 3 or 4 years because around the country, a lot of the cemeteries are running out of room and then buying more land and then doubling their fees. There was one in Auckland recently that put theirs up from 4 to 8 or 4.2 to 8.4 or something. Literally overnight, 100% increase. Nelson put theirs up, I think it was last year, by 50%. Yeah, we all know what we pay in rates. I don't want to talk local politics, but someone needs to get in there and actually go, no more. Stop putting them up. Yep, all gets set up. Yeah, so if you've got a plot, depending whether it's public or private, then there'll be some contractor or council who would do the digging of the plot. So you don't have to pay for it twice, you pay their digging fee. I think locally, if you already own the plot, it's about $1,200. So you'd still, you'd stay pay that fee, or you could hire. There's a hire service locally that you could borrow their hearse. That Maori lady I was talking about, Angel's Wings, yeah. Quite often with funeral homes, what we do is if it's that sort of distance, if you want to engage the local people, then we'd often meet halfway at a friendly funeral home, or they'd come down depending if it's just, you don't want to, the extra costs come in staying overnight if you're starting to pay for someone's accommodation and food, rather than, even if we're going to Auckland, we quite often say, look, rather than paying for me to go to Auckland, paying for accommodation and food and coming back, it's cheaper, usually, if you choose the right company, for us to go and meet in Taupo and the other guy to come from Auckland to Taupo, switch the deceased, get home for tea, you're not charging the family extra. So there's lots of tricks. Yeah. So cremation varies quite a bit depending where you go. Locally, we're $1,200 for our crematorium here, so a lot cheaper than a burial. Same sort of price as digging the plot. There are some crematoriums who are still owned by local councils, and they can be cheaper because they're subsidised by the ratepayers. Anything subsidised by a ratepayer is going to be cheaper. But they don't necessarily have the same hours. Like one of my favourite funerals we did at 7:30 at night, a lady wanted to have a funeral where she could watch the sunset. And so we went up to our crematorium. If anyone knows where our crematorium is, up here in Valley Road, It's the top of the cemetery, and Awatapo Cemetery looks down over the ocean and the end of the island. And we literally stood out there with glasses of bubbles and watching the sunset and eating nice nibbles. When it got too cold, we moved inside and sat around the heater and told stories for another hour. So when you own the place, you can do whatever you like. We have two charges for the use of the chapel up there. One is what's called a committal, so that's no more than half an hour, and the other is a full service, which is another $100, which gives you 2 or 3 hours. Yeah, we don't do more than 2 full funerals up there a day, and same with here. We never do. I say never. We've done it once. We never do more than 2 funerals here a day. So one in the morning, one in the afternoon. It just means there's no rush. There's no push. It's not like Australia. When I went to Sydney to look at one of their crematorium facilities there, they had 8 crematoriums, and they had a flying saucer is a chapel. You went up and you walked around the outside, which was glassed, and you went to the chapel. You walked in one door and you walked out another door because the next group were coming in 20 minutes later. Yeah, 20 to 30 minutes. And the English are like that too. Some of you with English heritage know that sometimes it's 6 to 8 weeks in England to get a funeral. And they literally, if you're going to the crematorium, you have a 20-minute window, 5 minutes to get in, 10 minutes for a service, and 5 minutes to get out. So we're very privileged in New Zealand to have lots of space and lots of people power. So if you want to work out how much you need to be paying us for a professional fee, you literally write over here, each one is $160, so you write up the top $160. The reason I haven't written that in at the moment is because next year it might be $165. So that's an open-ended piece of paper. And then obviously that professional fee doesn't work with us. That professional fee goes in that top column there. So that's how we work out our professional fee. Goes up there, and then you add all the other things that you're going to have for a funeral. So if you're doing it yourself, you might have none of those. So a true DIY will have nothing. But most DIY, like I've talked about, have some of us and some of you, depending how much you can do at the time. And it does change. Sometimes people want to do 99% of it themselves, but the person who wants to do it themselves is the one that's died. And then the family left behind haven't got that ability. So it ends up being mostly us. And we're quite happy with whatever you want us to do or not. Hopefully that's been helpful. There is a funeral costs book online on our website, which is there. This is what our website looks like. You jump on funeral costs and it has some set packages, but it also has some ideas and examples. And as you scroll down the page, there's a price list and everything. You can pick that up and choose from there, work it out yourself if you want to. Thank you. Yes, thank you. Because I didn't have anything out here for that. So thank you for reminding me. Yes, one of the great things about prepaying a funeral as opposed to funeral insurance is that if you prepay your funeral, it may or may not get interest depending on the scheme you're in. Usually most of the schemes don't have any fees anymore, which is great. So your money never goes backwards, but you can at least prepay it, and that's the end of it. Maybe you have to top it up if you live too long. The opposite to that is a gentleman I had a few years ago who had taken out insurance for $4,000 for a funeral, and he thought he was going to die by the time he probably got to 75. I think he'd worked out he was 60 when he retired and took it out. He came to me at 94, worked out he'd put $34,000 into that, and he was still only getting $4,000 when he died. So we all know how insurance companies work, and I'm not dissing them, but insurance companies work on the fact that you don't think you're going to get there. And when you do, you want to keep going, so you're going to keep paying. So prepaid funeral is, and I say this because the money doesn't come to us. You have to put it in a registered scheme somewhere. There's a national association scheme called Now for Them. Public Trust have a scheme, Trustee Executors, and there's one called Christian Savings Scheme, which is the only one I know pays interest. It's not a huge amount of interest, but it's about 2%, I think, at the moment. No, so you work out how much the funeral is going to be. So you came to $10,000 as a round figure, and you put 10,000 in there. Just know that inflation's going to keep going up. So the funeral might be 11 and you might have to top it up. So what we often suggest to people is, and some of them, like I said, some have interest, but it will never keep up with inflation. You know, during COVID, when inflation was 7.5% and the interest rates in our bank accounts were 2%, that means you're going backwards. It's not actually going down. It's going up faster than your money. So we often say to people, just put in another 500 or 1,000 than you think, and it should be about right. And if there's any extra, it goes back to the estate. So it's a really great way of just putting some money aside and being safe. If you've got the money put extra in there, it's always going to come back to your estate. Only the reason we talk about 10,000 all the time is 10,000 is the amount that is exempt for asset testing if you go into care. So if you want to get the subsidy to pay for your care, there's a threshold of about 200,000 you're allowed in assets, but the assets don't include a prepaid funeral. It's an exempt item. So that, as I say, the money doesn't come to us. It goes into a national scheme. So public trust or trustee executors or the funeral trust, which is now called Now for Them, they're all national schemes. Christian Savings Scheme is a national scheme. So anywhere in New Zealand's fine. And if you happen to die in Australia like my friend did, obviously you just get your money back. No. So I've got lots of stories, but I'm trying not to tell too many, otherwise you'll be here all day. But the worst story I had like that was where there was a son-in-law who was the executor to the lady's estate. He had 3 daughters. He was married to one, but he'd been divorced about a year. And whatever they wanted, he did the opposite. He was just spiteful against his ex-wife. Horrible scenario to be in. And I think the answer is very simple. Choose your executor wisely. I've had lots of clients ask me to be their executor just so they could get what they want, and I've refused. But choose your executor wisely. Just because you've got a son-in-law or a friend who's good with finance, not necessarily the right way to do it. Choose, and you can change your executor like that, as long as you're in mentis. So don't be afraid if you've got an executor in your will who you're thinking, not sure, then change it. My son's one of my executors. Well, my wife's my first, and he's the backup. And I just know that he stands on his principles so much that he'd never not do what I had in the will. He knows I'd come and haunt him. No, it's a really good point. Thank you. Choose your executor very carefully. Yeah. 2 scenarios. Yeah. Better than they used to, because most lawyers now have, if they're a bigger company, they'll have an estate specialist. So Sally Harrow's our lawyer, and she works for the Law Connection, not plugging Sally, but she is an estate specialist. Asked her to do some property stuff for me. She said, nope, all she does is estates. It's her specialty. But yes, I've only ever taken 2 people to court in my career. One was a lawyer from Upper Hutt, and one was public trust. And last year we had a seminar with a lawyer from Auckland talking about cases in New Zealand law that are now case law, which is case law is where you've had a verdict and it now becomes the scenario going forward. And one of those case law scenario was Kapiti Coast Funeral Home versus public trust. And I put my hands in, excuse me, that was me. And what it was this lady, this gentleman had died, and the lady who was his wife was a second wife, and she wouldn't pay for the funeral. She had rights to, nothing wrong with the funeral, she had rights to live in the house, but had no other cash. And she wanted the sons to pay for it. But the sons didn't want to pay for it because she wouldn't let them do anything they wanted to do in the funeral. She did everything her way. And so they said, we're not paying for it. Plus, she's got free use of the house for the rest of her life. We'll back you if you take her to court. So we took her to court and we won. Took 2 years and I lost more money than I made. I got paid the funeral, which was about 10,000. It cost me about 15,000 to take it to court, but I was doing it on principle. And they've changed the law now. The executor, if it's public trust, has to do what the estate, the will says. And the first thing in the estate law is that all pre-death bills shall be paid, which includes the funeral bill. So it wasn't interpreted well in the law. It now is. Yeah. My advice when you're doing a will is always to have co-executors. And I think it doesn't hurt to have someone in a professional capacity, like an accountant or a lawyer or public trust, but also a family member. So if you get a rogue family member, they can't get away with it because you've got a co-executor. If you've got a executor who's a lawyer or a public trust who are not pulling their weight, the other executor can actually basically fire them. Yeah, it's not easy to do, but they can hold them to account pretty well. Yeah, couple more. Yep. Whatever you want. So when a body is cremated, as soon as that's gone through that cremation process, they're no longer a human body in law. So there are no laws for cremation. There's lots of local regulation, but there's no laws. So the local bodies, for instance, can say you can't scatter ashes in our public parks, or DOC has some rules about scattering it in dockland. Maori have a lot of rules themselves about waterways and so forth, but they're not law. They're just their own whakapapa, their own tikanga. So yeah, you can do anything. I've done some cool stuff with ashes. The most scary thing I ever did was the first ever New Zealand helicopter pilot died, and she'd asked me to scatter her ashes because I like flying, but not a helicopter, I've fixed wing. So I went up over the Mangatuks, which is where she wanted them scattered, in this local helicopter, which was one of those deer shooting ones, with the big glass fronts, and the harness on them is designed to catch you when you're about out here, but I didn't think about that. I thought it was going to hold me about here. So when we finally got to the right place and I went with the ashes, and it caught me about here, I don't know where they went, but I turned around to the pilot and said, we're going to have to land quick because I just wet my pants. Final question and then pleasure. And please feel free to take any of that stuff from the back as well. Did you have another final one? No. No, as long as you're still in contact with them, that's fine. You can be executor from overseas quite happily. And the executor can inform someone else, like a neighbour or a friend, to look after things, on his behalf. So that's fine. There's a lovely video on our blogs section on our website. A lady who wanted her, she was the executor for her old teacher, who was Australian born but worked all her life in New Zealand, never had children, never got married. She wanted to scatter her ashes in the sea between Australia and New Zealand. So we worked out actually the other side of Kapiti Island, there's nothing between us and Australia. So it took us about 4 or 5 goes to get a day. We had to keep cancelling with the boatie. And he ended up taking us out on this glorious day with no wind, the other side of Kapiti, which almost is never still, and it was. And she was 91 or 92, this lady. And he took us out till it was 92 fathoms deep. And that's where we scattered them. Very cool. And there's a video on there of her actually scattering them. So, here's a depth finder in his boat. Not me, the master mariner. Yeah, he could show you. Yes. Yep. So a burial plot's usually limited to 2, double depth, one on the bottom, one on the top, but you can put as many lots of ashes in a burial plot as you like. Because they're not legally a body, they don't have to be at any certain depth or anything. So, and I could talk about natural burials and I could talk about lots of stuff, but I think it's time to stop. I've given you so much information. Do use our website. Anything you want to know is on there. If you like watching videos, as I say, there's lots of videos on there. There's a specialist page under funeral costs. There's a DIY page there specifically for DIY with a couple of videos. All right, thank you.